Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to Lest We Forget, a special Yom HaShoah experience by T'sahal BBYO and the JCCO Central New Jersey. We're sorry about the delay. You know how New Jersey is, all the little small towns, you get lost a couple times. It happens. My name is Eli Shanker, and I'm the Children's Services Program Director here at the Jewish Community Center of Central New Jersey. This past Monday was Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. An important reminder of the need to remember the atrocities committed against the Jews and others. However, it is not enough to simply remember what happened. There are less and less survivors alive every day. This generation of teenagers will be the last to hear directly from Holocaust survivors. That is why I appreciate the wording, "Lest we forget." "Lest we forget" highlights the active effort required in continuing the stories and education of the Holocaust. It highlights that silence and indifference are complicity, and most importantly, highlights the crucial need for young people to learn. As anti-Semitic incidents and Holocaust denial continue to rise in communities across America, it is more important than ever to keep the lessons of the Holocaust alive and speak out against hate, bigotry, and ignorance. This is why today's theme of intergenerational education and leadership is such an important one, as teenagers of today will be responsible for continuing this education. I am proud to see in this room leaders from all generations. One of my favorite aspects of Judaism is the inclusion of the young generation. Just a few weeks ago at Seder tables around the world, the youngest child recited the 4 questions, an intentional decision in Judaism to keep the young one engaged at the Seder table. This is a common theme throughout Judaism, both in religious and community practices, and it's something that has inspired me since the day I was the young one at that table. I'm excited to have the opportunity to host this event with BBYO, the largest Jewish teen movement in the world, and cannot think of a better way to display the incredible young leadership we have in our community. It has been inspiring to work with such passionate young leaders in preparation of this event. I would like to share a huge thank you to local BBYO chapter president, Jason Calderode. There are many more thank yous and introductions, but I will save them for the amazing team leaders I have just mentioned here today. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Lord Shavorchik, T'sahal BBYO Chapter Advisor.
Hi, everyone. Bring this experience to life and continue to share the message that we must never forget. We must never forget the unnecessary hatred, bigotry, and violence that came before us and that still lies in front of us. Before we begin, we wanted to take a moment to introduce everybody to BBYO, the world's premier teen-led Jewish youth movement and the organization behind today's experience. So we have a little video for everybody.
More Jewish teens, more meaningful Jewish experiences. It's as simple as that.
BBYO is the largest pluralistic Jewish teen movement in the world. For nearly a century, BBYO has been enriching the lives of Jewish teens, strengthening their identities, developing them as leaders, and bringing them together for fun and unique experiences. Every year, BBYO reaches tens of thousands of teens, ranging in ages from 13 to 18, across more than 700 chapters and in nearly 60 countries. With a powerful and expansive alumni network of more than 400,000 worldwide, BBYO alumni continue to be at the forefront of society in building themselves as global citizens, community members, and influential leaders.
The BBYO movement was founded in 1924 with a desire for young people to be a part of something bigger than themselves and to find a safe community to be who they are while exploring their Judaism. While the experiences and offerings have evolved throughout the years, the movement has always maintained the rich traditions on which it was founded. Today, every Jewish teen can feel at home within the global fraternity, the Al-Azadik Aleph, or AZA, the International Sisterhood, the B'nai B'rith Girls, or BBG, and a worldwide network of co-ed BBYO chapters and affiliate clubs. BBYO was originally part of B'nai B'rith International, but has been an independent organization since 2002.
Local chapters are the heartbeat of the movement. They are where teens take on their first leadership roles, develop their Jewish identities, and build friendships that last a lifetime. Chapters are focused on bringing as many Jewish teens together as possible for a variety of experiences that revolve around fun, education, service, Judaism, philanthropy, Israel, wellness, and democracy. Most importantly, Jewish teens are the leaders, decision makers, influencers, and builders of the BBYO experience. They are not told what to think or who to be, but are afforded knowledge and mentorship from their incredible staff and advisors. Teens in BBYO are the ones who plan, lead, organize, and participate.
Chapters that are based in the same geographic area make up different regions, and all regions around the world make up the international order. Every teen in BBYO has the opportunity to attend experiences and take on leadership roles on the chapter, regional, and international levels. Regions gather a few times a year, most commonly for weekend conventions, which typically include spirit activities, sports, guest speakers, Shabbat celebrations, service activities, and elections. International opportunities include summer leadership programs and camps, international travel programs, and a flagship festival experience. BBYO International Convention, the largest annual gathering of Jewish teen leaders worldwide, which takes place annually in February.
So why does BBYO do all of this, and what is its purpose?
BBYO has a proven model for success in building communities and inspiring the teens within them. The movement exists to ensure that teens see value in being part of the Jewish community, and achieves this through excellent experiences, teen empowerment, and committed networks of staff, advisors, parents, stakeholders, and alumni. BBYO welcomes Jewish teens of all backgrounds, gender, race, sexual orientations, and socioeconomic status, as well as those with a range of intellectual, emotional, and physical abilities. As a pluralistic organization, if a teen identifies as Jewish, they are welcome and encouraged to join and participate, regardless of how connected they feel to their Judaism.
When BBYO is at its best, the Jewish community is at its best. BBYO is the answer to Jewish teen engagement for any type of community, and is flexible to every community's needs with a diverse way of plugging into the movement at any level. BBYO can be the best weekly social experience, annual summer camp, Israel Travel Arm, sports league, or community service provider. BBYO can help grow local leadership through its alumni network and serve as mentors and consultants to teen engagement to any local professional. There is a bright future for the Jewish community as BBYO continues to engage more teens and more communities around the world.
BBYO is shaping the Jewish future. Find yourself here.
Thank you. We hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about BBYO. One of the nice things, especially with our chapter, and you'll see it here today, is there's a number of teens from the chapter here and a number of teens who will be speaking, but this program has been designed, orchestrated, researched, built, recruited, executed 100% by the teens. Eli and I have provided some guidance and some hope and some home, but they've done everything. You'll notice the recording equipment here. We are recording this for everybody to have for the future. It will be available on BBYO Insider, and it's something that as we salute the survivors, we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to hear moving into the future. I'm immensely proud of the work that this group of future Jewish leaders has done. They've worked together to deliver several programs like this over the past few years and continue to honor our past and remember the atrocities to make sure that nobody ever forgets about those who suffered and those who still suffer. Before I turn it over to them, there is one item that I just became notified of today. Many of you may have heard it. If you haven't, it's horrible, but it's also why we're here. Coming out of Nevada, there was a 17-year-old autistic boy who had a swastika carved into his back a month ago. Nonverbal, abused, taken advantage of. And that cannot happen. New Jersey, Nevada, anywhere. It's not acceptable. So just another example of why we're reminded why we have to keep doing this. So I'm going to turn it over to the teen leaders of this chapter and let them take you through the program and to our distinguished panel here and let them run you through everything. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for watching. We very much appreciate it.
Before we start, we want to take a moment to thank all of our partners and sponsors behind this afternoon's event.
Thank you to BBYO and the JCC of Central New Jersey for helping organize and plan this experience, as well as the school districts of UCBTS, Westfield High School, Scotch Plains Fanwood High School, and Tap Into Scotch Plains for helping us promote.
Thank you to If You Heard What I Heard, 3GNY, and the Union County Vocational Technical Schools for graciously providing guest speakers for our event.
And lastly, thank you to the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West New Jersey and Focal Point Productions for their partnership in bringing this experience to you all today. On your chairs, there's a pamphlet that contains some of the event information, biographical information about our speakers, and pens with papers for the Q&A section of our event. We will also send a link to the pamphlet in the YouTube and Facebook chats.
We are truly grateful for everyone who's worked to put together this event to bring the message of these Holocaust survivors to as many people as possible. The Holocaust was a catastrophic event in world history, during which 6 million Jews were systemically murdered by the Nazi regime during World War II. This traumatic experience left a profound impact on the Jewish people and their collective consciousness, and it emphasized the importance of having a safe and secure homeland. The State of Israel was founded in 1948, just a few years after the end of the Holocaust, and it has since become the center of Jewish life and culture. Israel provides a safe haven for Jews around the world, ensuring their survival and giving them a sense of belonging. However, the threat of anti-Semitism persists to this day, with incidents of hatred and violence against Jews occurring all over the world. Israel's importance for the Jewish people's survival has never been more evident than in recent years. With the rise of far-right political movements and extremist groups, anti-Semitism is on the rise once again. Israel serves as a refuge for Jews who face persecution and discrimination in their home countries, and it provides a sense of security and protection. Israel also plays a critical role in combating anti-Semitism on the global scale, working to raise awareness and fight against hatred towards Jews and other marginalized groups. In short, Israel's significance for the Jewish people's survival is undeniable, and it serves as a beacon of hope in the face of ongoing threats and challenges. Now I'm going to hand it over to Maya to introduce our moderator for today.
Thank you, everyone. Please give a warm welcome to tonight's moderator and T'sahal BBYO team president, Jason Calderon.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. So I really just kind of wanted to get started and introduce our wonderful panel. So can we get a warm welcome for our descendants of survivors, Alex Levine of If You Heard What I Heard, Barbara Simon of CBI, and Pat Romanchuk of 3GNY. And last, but most certainly not least, let's please give a very warm welcome to Holocaust survivor Fran Malkin. It is our responsibility to hear and listen to these people's stories and to pass them on to the next generation after us. That is exactly why we organized this event. We have a great lineup of speakers, and I would like everyone to go around and introduce themselves. I will start. My name is Jason Calderon. I am a senior at Scotch Plains' Academy for Information Technology, and I'm T'sahal BBYO's team president, and I'm very proud of it. I will also be your moderator for today.
Okay. I'm first, right? It's working. Well, there's a very, is it clear? Because I'm hearing myself.
Very good.
It's okay, okay. There's a very good summary here. You did a great job of my story. I was born in a town called Sokal. In 1938, it was in Poland at the time. It's now in the Ukraine. It's near a place called Lviv, so about an hour away, which if you watched any of the reporters that covered the war usually, they're in Lviv. It's about an hour from the Polish border. And after Germany declared war on Poland, the United Kingdom declared war on Germany, and Poland was split between Germany and the Soviet Union. Our town was in the Soviet part, and my family had very good businesses. My mother had a confectionery store. They imported chocolates from Germany, a lot of it. And her parents were in the cattle business. They distributed cattle all around Europe. And when the communists came in, under communism, you're not allowed to own any property. So everything was taken away from them. Strangers were moved into their houses. Some of them were displaced into other places. So in 1941, when Germany turned on the Soviet Union, we were occupied by the Germans. The first thing they did was, I was 2.5 years old, I don't have the time to read this, but I'll tell you this. My mother had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. One of them kept a diary. We spent 2 years being hidden by a Polish Catholic woman and her daughter. When the war when the final liquidation was starting, and he kept a diary. I don't have the time to read portions of it, but what he describes, the first thing they did when they came in is they said they need the Germans and the Ukrainians. He speaks of the Ukrainians who collaborated with the Germans. They were running the town after the Germans came in. So I won't read you one, just a little portion of it, because I like the way he describes it. When the Jews arrived at the town square, a crowd of Ukrainians was already there waiting for them, dressed in their Sunday best, as if they had all been invited to a party. Some big shots took over and announced that 400 Jewish males were required for labor assignments. They then proceeded to select 400 professionals, businessmen, ordinary, able-bodied individuals, all at random, and turned them over. The people that were supposed to come out, the men, the Jewish men, had to be 14 to 60. So some of you might be 14. And turned them over to a detachment of SS men, which were the killing Germans. Among the 400 selectees was Ellie Letzter, my sister Leah's husband. The 400 were marched off to a brick factory just outside Sokol. There they were shot and their bodies tossed in a mass grave. That is how my sister lost her husband and my baby niece, Faye. He uses my Yiddish name, Feigachasha, her father. And I was 2.5 years old. I don't remember my father. I have a few photos, and my mother told me he came over, he picked me up, he hugged me, he kissed me, and wept. I don't know if he had a premonition, and went out. And I guess the reason he went out was they had nothing. They didn't have an income for 2 years. So they were promised work. That was the big trick the Germans used. And, Auschwitz, Arbeit macht frei, work makes you free. So we didn't know what happened to them. A ghetto was formed in our town. I remember my mother sewing on a yellow star. The ghetto was like an area of a couple of square blocks enclosed by barbed wire, and all the Jews were supposed to report there, and they were going to take them to work. The Jews, the reason I believe the Germans did that, there were about 1,000 ghettos in Europe, and which I've read, is the Jews were all enclosed in one place. Otherwise, they would have had to go look for them. There was a death camp near our house, about an hour from us, called Belzec. Belzec you don't hear about because when people came, the way they did it, and I just saw a professor talking about, you came into the ghetto, they put you into a room. The way they set it up is there were what they called actions. They would have the Germans, they took all your possessions, they took all your belongings. They set up the Judenrein to help them, which are the Jewish police, to help them run the camps. They had the railroad. They had 3 actions during the time we were there. And each one, they would round up as many Jews as they could find. They would send them, put them in the train. They told them, we're not going to kill you. Bring all your belongings, bring all your money. And we're going to take you to work. When the train, which was packed with Jews, got to Belzec, they told them, don't be afraid, we're not going to kill you, we'll take you to work, but first you have to go and take a shower. And in those showers, it was only gas came out. I just want to read you another little paragraph. Do I have the time?
We're good.
One Sunday, my brother stops at my house as usual on his way home from the railroad station. He worked at the railroad station. He seems ready to burst into tears. What happened, I ask him. It takes quite a while before he's able to talk. He pulls a bundle of papers from his bag and hands it to me. He says, these are documents found in a railroad car he and other Jewish workers had to clean today. The car was part of a train that returned empty from the death camp of Belzec. He and his friends also found American dollar bills torn into small pieces. Apparently, the deportees who owned these dollar bills destroyed them on the journey to Belzec so that the Nazi Ukrainian murderers should not be able to use them. In addition, he and his friends picked up children's clothes and identification papers issued in the city of Kovel, bearing an official Nazi seal and giving the age of the holder as 18. Look at these papers, he says. Do you still think it's worthwhile to go on living? You know, you hear about the trains. This gives you a little view into it. My family felt the only way you couldn't fight the Nazis, so the only way you could defeat them is survive. And you had to do what you could. And that was the purpose. And if anybody read Viktor Frankl's book, he kind of says that you people who survived had that purpose. And to my family, it was very important. There was a lot of disease and hunger in the ghettos, and I remember moments of it. I had typhus, I was sick. There was no medicine, so you either died or you lived. So they would sneak out of the ghetto at night, and they would go talk to their neighbors and ask them if they could hide his family. And he was turned down by everybody because to be discovered hiding Jews, they would kill you and your family too. So you almost can't blame him. It was a tremendous risk. Plus, they gave an incentive to the neighbors to turn them in. Turn their neighbors in. They would give them money, and some vodka, and some food. And they had a relationship with this lady. You can't see it here. Her name was Francesca Holocaust. She lived with her daughter, Helena. Helena was probably in her 20s. She worked in the post office. And she said, I'll hide your family. And so we snuck out of the, because my uncle worked at the railroad, he knew the third action was the final one. They also, my mother had a sister who was sick. She had tuberculosis. So they wanted the doctor with him. So Dr. Kindler in our town, his wife and 2 sons came with us. So there were 3 children here. I was the youngest. We snuck out under the barbed wire that night, walked along the river, this big river, which was the dividing part, and walked to her house. When we got there, these are very little houses. They're attached to each other. The neighbors hear you. The neighbors see what you're doing. You know, it's not what you think in New Jersey, a separation. And she sent us to a barn she had behind the house. There were pigs downstairs, and there was a ladder that led up to a trapdoor. And when you walked up, there was straw on the floor. It was the type of a roof. And we went up there past the pigs, and there was an outhouse in there also. And there were 13 of us in that small space. The problem was, I was the youngest, and they were very worried about taking me, and both my uncles had this discussion. And at that point, we still didn't know what happened to my father. They had this discussion. Maybe you should leave her in front of a church or a convent. Because I was little, I was young, and that was not too uncommon. People, Jews, left their little children, and many times the priests and the nuns took them in and raised them. And, you know, over the years, many people have found out they're Jewish who didn't know their parents never returned. So I promised I wasn't going to cry. And when I got there, I cried. And Francesca, he has like a 2-page description of it, so I'm not going to go into the reading. But she started beating the pigs, so the pigs' cries would drown out my cries. The Germans and the Ukrainians were all around. And I remember them putting a pill in my mouth. What happened is she came to them. Maybe I should read you just this sentence. He just says this better than I say it. At about 8 o'clock that evening, Mrs. Holocaust knocks on our hayloft door with her stick. That's how she would bring us food take away our waste. We opened the door. You'll have to do something, she says, very much upset. If this crying goes out, it'll be the end of all of us. We promise her that we will do something. After she has left, we huddle and discuss what we should do. We come to a terrible decision. We'll have to kill Faye with poison from Dr. Kindler's medical bag. We can't endanger 14 other lives, those of our family, the Kindlers and the 2 Holomayovas, because of one child. We report our decision to Mrs. Holomayova. She doesn't say a word. What could she say? Faye goes on crying. We cover Faye with blankets. Dr. Kindler pours a spoonful of poison from one of his vials and forces the spoon between Faye's lips. Faye makes a face, spits it out, and keeps on crying. Finally, some of the poison seems to stay in. After a few minutes, Faye stops crying. Her eyes fall shut. She appears unconscious. She does not seem to be breathing. We all squat around the little figure, the limp little figure, lying in the straw as if we were already sitting Shiva. No one makes a sound. My sister Leah, Faye's mother, does not weep. I forgive you for what you have done to my child, she whispers, as long as God forgives you. One life for a chance to save 14 other lives. She told me her plans were to, when they took my body down, to jump down and jump in the river which ran along the house. 2 hours later, at about 10 o'clock, Mrs. Holomayova comes to us holding out a large burlap bag. The child's soul's with God now, she says, in a voice that betrays no emotion. Put her in this bag. I'll bury her. Dr. Kindler leans forward to pick up the limp little body from the straw. As he touches the child, his sensitive hands feel something unexpected. He motions to me and whispers in my ear, "There is a pulse. It's faint, but I can feel it. This child is alive." It takes a moment to grasp what the doctor is saying. Then I say that if the child wasn't killed by the dose of poison he gave her, it's nothing short of a miracle. Faye was meant to live. We spent 22 months there. There were some incidents where we were almost caught and where the Ukrainian neighbors tried to force her to leave. We were liberated in July 1944 by the Soviet Union, and we were liberated about 6 months before Auschwitz because we were right on the Russian border, and they came through our town. That's when my mother found out that my father and 400 other Jewish men were murdered, taken to an old brick factory outside of town, made to dig their own graves and shot them. And so my mother at that point said, "We have to leave. There's no life for us here anymore. We're leaving." And eventually we all left. We wound up traveling through Europe because Auschwitz hadn't been liberated yet. After that, the Americans had founded the displaced persons camps, and I guess some of you grandparents or great-grandparents may have met at these displaced persons camp because they were a place to come back to life. They lasted about 5 years. They were in Austria and Germany mostly. We were in Austria. They had medical facilities and they had training schools, training of adults for work. They had entertainment, and they had an enormous amount of weddings. I've heard, well, okay, most children didn't survive, and most old people didn't survive. So the people who survived mainly were young adults. And they came out of concentration camps or hiding or the woods or wherever. And they went home, and there was nobody there. And then through networking, they would meet each other and say, go to these DP camps. And they'd meet somebody from their neighborhood or next town, and they'd get married and have a baby 9 months later. And statistically, I've read that the most per capita, the most weddings and babies born were during that 5-year period. If you watch CNN, Wolf Blitzer was born in Germany, in a CNN camp, in a DP camp. And my mother found an uncle and some aunts in Newark. My family, I shouldn't say. Originally, we were going to go to Palestine, but what they had in the camps also is there were a number of Yiddish newspapers around the world, and people advertised, Moth's family survived, these members are there people, and then people from America, Canada, Australia, whatever country advertised that somebody from this family survived. And they located their mother's brother, their uncle, and 4 of his sisters, and they sponsored us. And we came to Newark, and we lived in Newark. We were surrounded by all Holocaust survivors. Everybody went to work. The adults went to night school. My uncle met his wife at night school. It was like starting again, and it was very important for, I think, for the people who came to make a life, because otherwise Hitler won. You had to make a life for yourself. And I went to school, worked my whole life, got married, have a daughter, 2 grandchildren. About 10 years ago, we went back to Sokol. We made a film. The 2 granddaughters of Francesca came with us. The people that were adults during the war were no longer here, so 3 of us went back. And one of them was my cousin Chaim Waltz, who used to take trips with the JCC of Central Jersey. He lived in Elizabeth, but retired to Jerusalem. He passed away 2 weeks ago. And he was 3 years older than me. And for 70 years, I didn't speak to my mother, to my uncles, to anybody about it. I went on with my life and just totally discussed it. And the friends that I had that were my age were also Holocaust survivors. None of us talked about it. But after I made the film, or my family made the film, our filmmaker was Judy Maltz. She's my cousin. She writes a column for Haaretz. If any of you read Haaretz, Judy Maltz. And when I came, what impacted me was when I got to the brick factory. I never cried before for my father because my mother didn't remarry and I had no concept of a father. And when I got there, that was the first time he became real. And I really wept. And that stayed with me since then. And I was standing there saying, why was he killed? He was Jewish. I mean, there was no reason. Hitler made it. I even say Hitler didn't do it. Germany was the most sophisticated, advanced country in Europe at the time. And they turned into the most sadistic, vicious killers by following his propaganda. So things can do it. The only thing that I thought of at that point that maybe would have saved us, which was Hitler said to the world, I don't want the Jews, you can have them, take them in. And nobody wanted them, including the United States. And so there was nowhere to go. There was no one to fight for you. The only way you survived is if you fought for yourself by surviving, which was either dumb luck or you really worked hard at it. And so the only thing that could have saved us, I believe, is a very strong land of Israel. Because at that time there was Palestine, and that was British held. So right now, when people talk about anti-Semitism, I don't like what's happening in Israel because they're weakening themselves, and they have to be strong. Because Hitler looked at Jews as a race, and that's why he went back third generation. Because if you converted from Judaism, became Catholic, didn't help you. You were Jewish. Your blood, it was in your blood. So, to me, that's the only thing that can. It's very important. That's it. My story. I'm going to detail.
Thank you so much for. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Faye.
Thank you.
Do you prefer Fran or Fran?
Any name. I have a lot of names.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I just wanted to go down the rest of the line for us to tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Yeah. The other thing I want to say to the people here is I didn't talk to my mother. I didn't talk to my uncles. I didn't talk to anybody. Speak to your grandparents, to your great-grandparents. Everybody has a story, and especially you have a background, because many, many people who survived the Holocaust just didn't talk about it. So that's the only thing I would say, find out their story.
All right, Barbara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Barbara Simon, a child of 2 Holocaust survivors, both of them from Poland. My father was in Auschwitz, and he was liberated in Ebensee. My mother was in 2 work camps, Klettendorf and Ludwigsdorf. My father was originally a family of 5 kids, 2 parents. My father had a sister, and the eldest was sent out before the war began, and she was the only person other than my father that survived. They were all, my 2 aunts, uncle, and my grandparents were all gassed and murdered in Auschwitz. My mother's family, she had a younger sister who, when they did the final actions and emptied out the town, my grandmother told my mother to lie and say she was a year older than she was. She was 12 at the time. They said, say you're 13. My aunt was 3 years older than her, and her sister was 8 years old. And so my grandfather, my grandmother, and my 8-year-old aunt went straight to the gas chambers. And my mother and my aunt stayed together the entire time and survived and were liberated, along with one of the strange facts, as it turns out, the women of her town that she was with the entire time, and the majority of them all survived. They have no idea how. It was just when you talk to, statistically speaking, 91% of the Jews that were in Poland at the time that the Nazis invaded died in the gas chambers, or were murdered, were shot, myriad of ways, starvation, 91%. Yet my mother and my aunt and several of her, majority of her friends all survived. It was always this thing that we always were like, well, there's so many of you. Like, why you? And they had absolutely, of course, no answer for that. Neither of my parents spoke about the Holocaust. Very little. We had small stories here and there. The one I remember most is my father telling us Mengele went like this to him to go to the gas chamber, and then went, and pointed to the man next to him. And that's how your life was then. You really didn't know from day to day. Luckily, he was a tailor, so he spent the entire time sewing, mending the clothes of those that had been gassed, or uniforms, because all the stuff they took from the Jews or anyone else that were in the concentration camps were all sent back into Germany, so that they didn't have to, there were no shortages of clothes, of shoes, of jewelry, of, all of that all got sent back. They were both liberated. At that point, my aunt went back to the hometown, to Krzanów in Poland, and found out that everyone had perished, and did find out that my grandfather had died on the death march to Auschwitz, the same one my father survived. My father found out that everyone was gone, and that all was left for him was his sister that was in Palestine. So, but you couldn't just go, so the two of them actually met up in Germany. They weren't in a DP camp, but there was a lot of Jews ended up in Regensburg in Germany. A lot of weddings, and at one of the weddings my parents met. Meanwhile, my mother was coming here, and my father went to Palestine to see his sister, his last surviving relative. Long story short, not worth getting into, my father ended up here, married, started a business. But as I got older, both my parents passed away young, in their 70s. It became this, why didn't I ask questions? Why didn't I ask about this thing, about that thing? They never did the Shoah thing, so I found friends of theirs that did, so through them I would find out things. And it got to the point where I started deciding I needed to speak up for the voices they didn't have anymore. And towards the end of my father's life, he had finally started to speak about it. Anyway, so I decided this is what I was going to do. I was going to do whenever I can, whoever would allow me to come in and speak and tell my parents' stories. I've done extensive research. There are several rabbit holes one can go down when you start doing these things. But I've reconstructed a fair amount of their story that I believe is probably 95% what it was. And that's what we all have to do. And that's why, as Faye said, as any survivor that's alive, be it a relative or just some friend's grandparent at this point, ask questions. They'll answer you. They need to be asked. And then they'll probably talk about it.
Alex?
My name is Alex Levine. I'm the grandchild of 2 Holocaust survivors. Both of my grandparents were born in Krakow, Poland. They lived a couple of blocks away from each other. They had mutual friends, but they did not meet before the war. Both of my grandparents were moved into the Krakow ghetto. My grandfather lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with his mom, his 2 sisters, his grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. 16 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. And my grandmother and her whole nuclear family, along with 3 other families that they did not know, lived in a similar-sized apartment in the Krakow ghetto. My grandfather's father was taken before they were kicked out of their home, and he was taken with 14 or 15 other men, and they had to dig a mass grave in a different town, and they were killed. And while my grandfather was in the Krakow ghetto, he was the man of the house. He had to take care of his family. And there were days where he was out looking for food, looking for odd jobs, whatever he could do. And he came across 2 Ukrainian guards who were robbing the suitcases that were left out on the street of the Jews that were just liquidated. And one of the guards spun the rifle around, knocked him in the head, and put a bullet in the gun, put his finger on the trigger, and another guard knocked the gun out of his hand and said, "He's just a little boy. You can't kill him." And They let him go. That was just a day in the ghetto for him as a 13-year-old boy. After they were removed from the Krakow ghetto, they were in Plaszow concentration camp, both of my grandparents, and they still had not met. And my grandfather was separated from his mother and two sisters because they kept the men and the women separate. And he went up to a fence and he saw some girl there. Have you seen my sister? Have you seen my mother? That girl was my grandmother. They were working. They both worked in the same room together, sorting clothing. Again, they were moved to different concentration camps. They had not seen each other for a while. My grandfather went from Plaszow eventually to Mauthausen towards the end of the war. And my grandmother went from Plaszow to Auschwitz to Mauthausen. My grandmother never spoke about the Holocaust. She never wanted to admit that it happened to her. When I was a little boy, I saw her tattoo, and I said to her, "What's that on your arm?" And she told me it was a phone number. And I said to her, "Nana, there's no letters in phone numbers." And she yelled at my mother in Polish, and my mother whisked me away and redirected my attention to something else. It never happened. My grandfather was the polar opposite. He spoke to anyone that wanted to listen about the Holocaust. He spoke in classrooms, he spoke in colleges, he spoke in JCCs. It was his mission to make sure that everyone knew what happened to him, what happened to his family. Because when he was in Plaszow, he worked for Amon Get. If you've seen Schindler's List, he was the commandant of the camp. My grandfather worked in his office. He would watch him shoot Jews every single day. He would watch him walk out into the camp with his dogs, and he would scream their names. They were Ralph and Alf, and the dogs would jump out, and they would rip people apart. And he worked 15 feet away from this man for months on end, not knowing if it was the last second. If he had pieces of paper like this versus like this, he could have been shot. That was the constant panic that he was in for most of his experience in the Holocaust, working under Amon Get. When he was in Plaszow with his two sisters, he would tell them, because he would hear in the office that they were doing a selection, an appel, to go into the back of the line. If you stayed in the back of the line, you were more likely to live. So they stayed in the back of the line consistently for weeks and weeks and weeks, and finally one day they were doing a selection, and they said, "Everyone turn around." And his two sisters were then in the front of the line. They were moved from Plaszow. They took them to Stutthof. They realized they were losing the war, so they moved people further away from the borders of Poland and further into Germany, further up into Germany and Austria. And they were in Stutthof for a couple of weeks. And one night they took a death march to the beach. They lined up 7,000 women, and they shot them. And the next morning was liberation. So growing up, I heard every bit of my family's history. My grandfather was the only survivor from his entire nuclear family, from his entire extended family. And my grandmother, she and her father survived. And like I'd said, they met in the camps. So he had no one. And they stayed in touch because he kept on going up to the fence in Plaszow. When he was in the Krakow ghetto, if he had not, he would see her in passing, and they had mutual friends. When they were in Mauthausen, "Have you seen my sisters?" So after liberation, they stayed in touch, and he wrote to her. They moved to Belgium together. They had to wait, I believe, 6 months to get civilly married after being residents of Belgium. So they got religiously married, and then a year into living in Belgium, they got civilly married. And then they decided, where are we going to go? And they ended up in the United States. They moved to New York with my aunt. She was a couple months old. They ended up having my mom and her younger sister. And my grandfather started a business here. And that's pretty much their story. And the reason why I speak about it is I've been in a very insulated community filled with children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. And there's really not many left. And in a couple of years, there aren't going to be any more. And it's important for us to make sure that it never happens again.
Pam?
Hi, everybody. My name is Pam Romanchuk, and I'm sitting here on behalf of my grandfather, Grandpa Henry. He was born and raised in Leipzig, Germany, with his mom, dad, and his sister, Ruth Charlotte. We call her Lottie. And he had, by what he says, as all accounts, is a normal childhood until it wasn't normal. But he had what he would call the latest toys, which were wooden trains. He had a radio in his house, and he went on family vacations. His father was a World War I veteran who fought for Germany. He was highly patriotic. He loved Germany. He wanted to raise his kids to be proper Germans. And so when tensions started rising in Germany, my great-grandfather Max used to just say, this will all blow over. The German government will come to the rescue and the Jews will be fine, despite being able to get out of Germany well before anything else happened. But because of his love of country, the family ended up staying. Kristallnacht occurred, and it completely changed my grandpa's life. His father was arrested, and during that time, the family realized what kind of danger that they were in. And so my grandpa, at this point at 14 years old, goes from we're proper Germans to we're enemies of the state. And when his father comes back and they say, we have to get out of here, it's too late for that to happen. And so the family goes from a 2 to 3 bedroom apartment. They get moved into another area of Leipzig where they are shoved into a 1 bedroom apartment with other families. A Jewish star is nailed to the door. The Nuremberg laws get put into place. He's forced to wear a Jewish star on his clothes, which he frequently doesn't. He's a teenage boy at this point, and he thinks there's no harm, no foul in taking off the star and going out to the movies or going out to a party. Obviously, he realized when he was a little bit older, he was playing with his life, but up until that point, he didn't see a big deal with it. From there, the family eventually gets transported to Theresienstadt. And my grandfather was actually there when the Red Cross came to visit. He was told that he had to be in the cafe that they had built specifically for the Red Cross visit at the Theresienstadt ghetto. And he was told he had to dance. That was his job. For the entire time that he was in this cafe, he was told he had to dance. He didn't think it was such a bad day. They got extra food, they got new clothing, the grass was painted green, the buildings were rebuilt, so he didn't, again, teenage boy, didn't really see much of a problem with this. And then he was given the job of taking the items of people who had died and redistributing them, taking their clothing and things like that. And so as a result of that, he had to go through routine medical checks to make sure that he wasn't sick with anything. At one of these routine medical checks, despite having no symptoms, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis. And this diagnosis would come back to haunt him a couple times in his life. When the deportation started, he and his father were called first. And when he and his father arrived at the train station to be deported to Auschwitz, he was told, you're sick, you can't go. And he didn't know it at the time, but that'd be the last time he would see his father. His father was killed on arrival at Auschwitz. A couple of weeks later, his mother and his sister were both called for deportation. He was not, but he said he was going to go to the train station anyway because he was not about to lose his mom and his sister. And he gets to the train station, and they say, you're not going anywhere, you're sick. And that was the last time he saw his mom and his sister. They were also killed on arrival at Auschwitz. Because he had the label of being sick, a couple weeks later, he was put on a transport of elderly and sick individuals. And when he got to Auschwitz, he recalls someone telling him, take off your glasses, stand up straight, look bigger, look stronger. And even until the day he died, he had no idea where he would have heard that voice from, because arriving on a train with other prisoners who did not know what was happening to them, it wouldn't have made sense for anyone to be able to tell him what to do. And of the 1,500 people he estimated to be on that train, 70 were sent into the camp, and he was one of those 70. He was in Auschwitz for about a week, and then somebody from a factory said, I need skilled metal workers. My grandfather, having been brought up in Germany, speaking German, spoke out of turn and said, I'm a skilled metal worker. He was a liar. He did not have any metalworking skills, but he saw this as his chance out, and so they said, okay, and he was actually transported to a subcamp of Gross-Rosen. And when he was there, he was sent to work in a factory building airplane propellers for German airplanes that never left the factory, because this was towards the end of the war. This was in 1944 this happened. And he was in, I believe the subcamp was called Friedland. He was in Friedland when it was liberated. And he thought it was a big trap, because one morning he wakes up and there's no Nazi officers around. And he and his fellow prisoners kind of just stood where they were. They were scared that if they had left their barracks, they would have been killed. And it wasn't until the Soviet Union came through the camp that they realized what was happening. And then my grandfather, after liberation, tried to backtrack through his journey. He went back to Theresienstadt to see if he could find word of his family. He found none. He went to Leipzig to see if he could find word of his family, and he found none. And ultimately ended up in a displaced persons camp, where he used his German to forge birth certificates for people so they could have an identity and try and get out of wherever they were. After a couple of years, I believe it was 2, being in the displaced persons camp, he was finally able to connect with his own American family and come to the United States. He came on a Wednesday before Thanksgiving and was stuck on the boat for an extra couple of days because the ports were closed because of the holiday. He didn't entirely mind. He said that there was American music and he was served a Thanksgiving dinner. He laughed when he remembered this, but I think it's a funny story. So part of the Thanksgiving dinner was fresh milk. And I guess he's used to milk in glass bottles, but they handed it to him in a carton, and he questioned why Americans drank milk out of cardboard boxes. But that was one of his first culture shocks of being in the United States. When he got off the boat on the Friday after Thanksgiving, he met with his American family, and they brought him to an apartment that they had found for him. And they said to him, Heinz, because his name in German was Heinz, "You're on your own." And they walked away from him. And he said it was one of the best things that ever happened to him, because now he had his total freedom, he didn't owe anybody anything, and he could start his life over. He found a job with a company who knew his father from Germany, worked for that company for 30 some odd years, and like many people had mentioned here, didn't talk about the Holocaust for the longest time. It wasn't until Schindler's List came out that he finally felt like he was allowed to talk about the Holocaust. And he talked about, once Schindler's List came out and he was dragged quite literally to see it, he had no desire to see it, he felt like he had permission, and since about 1994, he went around telling his story as often as he could to whoever would listen, except to his grandchildren. I never once heard the story directly from him. My grandfather was interviewed as part of Steven Spielberg's collection, Survivors of the Shoah, and all the information that I know is from his interview from that experience, and also doing my own research. But it was always something that was expected growing, like we all knew he was a Holocaust survivor, but none of us ever bothered to ask questions, and he wouldn't even really talk about it with us even if we tried, and so it was just kind of something that we all lived with. And I do regret not asking him the questions. So I'm gonna echo what everyone else here has said, which is if you have family who are Holocaust survivors, start asking those questions now, because you're gonna regret it if you don't get the chance to. But my grandfather, when he passed away having had 6 great-grandchildren, a lot of grandchildren, I lost count how many of us there are, and six kids. So, he was a survivor, and he passed on his legacy through the rest of his family.
So thank you so much for sharing your stories. The first question I have is for Pam, because everyone kind of touched on it a little bit, and that question is, what specifically is your motivation for keeping his story alive?
That's a question I've been searching for the answer for a long time. I did not initially tell my grandfather's story. He passed away this past October and was telling his own story for as long as he could to whoever would listen. And then I felt responsible for continuing his story. There was nothing really in particular that set me off in that direction. I've always been interested in Holocaust studies as a history teacher, as just a personal individual, and I think I felt responsible once he passed away to make sure that his story was continued, because that was really important to him, and obviously is now important to me. I share his story with my students, I share his story with my own daughter, to make sure that these memories are not forgotten. I mean, that's the topic of today's, right? Lest we forget, because unfortunately we're still seeing, over half of all religious hate crimes reported are reported against Jews, and we make up a very, very small part of the American population. So, we share these memories of lest we forget, but there's people who haven't even heard them before. So my goal in sharing my grandfather's story is to reach individuals who would not otherwise have the chance to hear it, and hopefully start making change one individual at a time, so we don't hear stories of 17-year-old nonverbal autistic children getting swastikas carved into their backs, because that's horrific and shouldn't be happening in today's day and age.
Thank you. So this question is for anyone on the panel to answer, and the question is, what role do you have, if it comes for Fran, it's in shaping how people see your story. If it comes from any of the rest of you guys, it's the role that you have in shaping the way that people see your relative story. And How does this influence the way that people see Jews in general?
Me? I was very skeptical for years about going and telling people my story. I mean, I couldn't see anybody wanted to listen to it. But after I realized what had happened and what could happen and to what depravity people can be driven, my only thing that I felt, that I feel is, I don't know if it can be stopped. I wish somebody could say to me, you tell your Holocaust story and nobody will do anything bad. So I'm not sure that's the case. But what I tell kids in schools and they respond is that I saw all these Holocaust people who went through the worst unimaginable experiences, and they went on with their lives, and the majority did not want to stay victims. It's the only way they felt they had the only revenge you had was to stay alive and to make alive and to have children. And so I'm not a good one to ask because I know there's a lot of anti-Semitism now. You read about, and I read that also what happened. I don't know if telling our story, when I tell my story, I do it. My father had 3 brothers, 2 sisters. Nobody survived, his parents. So I do it to memorialize, remember them at this point. To me, I come back to what I said before, the only thing as strong as Israel. I genuinely believe that. And I think, the world doesn't have to love you, but they have to be scared of you or respect you. And I keep trying to come up with something else, and I can't.
So, Barbara, has talking about your parents' experiences changed the way you see your parents and or their experiences at all?
Changed? Yes and no. Probably more no. I knew what they went through, generally speaking. My entire extended family, majority were not blood relations, but they were all survivors who, I guess it's a responsibility that I felt. What started me on this path was something that happened in the Westfield Middle School, where I'm from, my children grew up. And the idea that something like that could happen, and the thought of my parents, if they'd be alive, would know things like that were happening, I guess angered me for them. There's not many that are still alive of those that are their friends, that other survivors. There's only 2 people left. And both of them almost kind of regret still being here to see what's happened to this country that they thought was their place they'd be safe and assume their children would be safe and their grandchildren would be safe. So they've told me, this is nothing they expected. It breaks their heart to see what is going on. So I guess that's part of, it hasn't changed. That's what causes me to talk about it, was because they're not here to do it at this point. There's too much going on to be quiet. People seem to, you have one of those silly things they ask, what was the Holocaust? And people sit there and say the stupidest things. Even people in this state who, the education's supposed to be mandated. So, yeah.
So this question's for Alex. Has talking about your grandparents' story, your grandfather's story, changed the way that you connect to Judaism?
It's a great question. Not a very religious person. That being said, I'm very Zionistic. I think the state of Israel is one of the most important. It's one of the most important things to Jews in today's day and age. If the state of Israel, I would say, maybe existed during the Holocaust, maybe it wouldn't have happened. Maybe they would have been able to stop it. So it's not a connection necessarily to Judaism that I would say. I am connected to Judaism, but I feel more Zionistic than I do religious.
Thank you. So this question can be answered by anybody. And the question that I have is, we recognize, all four of you have touched upon it, the prevalence of anti-Semitism, not just in the world, but in our community around here. So what can we, as Jewish teens, there's plenty of Jewish teens and non-Jewish teens in this room, what could we as teenagers do to combat anti-Semitism, to combat hate for all communities in general?
So there's a word that is used now. It's called upstander. And what that means is if you see something, say something. Be it an anti-Semitic comment, being a racist comment, being an anti-LGBTQ comment, anything. To sit there and, my generation most of the time, the things we used to say in the lunchroom, would be, we'd all be labeled all sorts of nice things. That we thought it was okay to talk like that about people to their face or behind their back or whatever. So I am truly hopeful that your generation, I see it with my kids, they don't allow people to say ignorant things in front of them. If it's something about them, absolutely not. Something about somebody else. Even ourselves, we get corrected because what was normal for me to say a word, which I'm not going to repeat because then I'm guilty of it, we learn to adjust your language. And I think your generation has certainly taught people that words matter. And words can be cruel to people and hurt their feelings, and sometimes, many steps ahead, cause something to happen that may not happen otherwise. Good, bad, or indifferent, but most of the time bad.
I would say that, I'm assuming all of you are seniors in high school, right? You're all going to college? No? Not all.
All different
You're a
ages.
senior? Junior, okay. You have some time. When you go to college, you're going to see people that have never met a Jew, potentially. You're going to see people that have no idea what you look like, where are your horns, whatever kind of stupid comment. Don't be ashamed that you're Jewish. Don't let someone treat you like garbage because they're ignorant. That being said, I'm not saying you need to grow payas. I'm not saying you need to wear a yarmulke around campus, but be proud of who you are, and especially if you're a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, or if you're not, be proud of who you are, and don't let someone tell you that you're less than them. That's simple.
So Jews throughout the Holocaust, Jews since the Holocaust that have faced anti-Semitism have shown the true spirit of fighting for themselves, fighting for what they believe in, and fighting to stay alive. So this question's for Pam. How can we keep that fighting spirit, fighting for Judaism, fighting for the right thing, and fighting against hate? How can we keep that spirit alive?
I think everybody's doing it right now by being here. That's the key, going out and going to temple, saying hello to somebody. I mean, I don't think it's about the fighting spirit. I think it's about the coming together spirit. I think it's about allowing people like to listen without needing to respond, to listen, to understand. I think it's really important for people to echo, again, what everyone is saying, just kind of be who you are. I think that, I have a lot of thoughts right now. That was a good question. I'm trying not to babble, so we're gonna try this. So I think it's not necessarily about the fighting spirit. I think it's just being proud of who you are and being proud of who you are in whatever context that means. So for example, I don't consider myself particularly Jewish. Yeah, I celebrate the high holidays, but that's about it. I'm not the kind of person who goes to temple on Friday or anything like that, but that doesn't make me any less Jewish than somebody who's super conservative or Orthodox. I think it's just about honoring Judaism in your way and sharing that with whoever's willing to listen. I'm a teacher, and I talk to my students all the time about what it means to be Jewish, and I listen to them about what it means to be Muslim or Christian or Catholic or Buddhist or anything like that. And I think just having those conversations and not being scared to take part in those conversations is really critical in keeping that fighting spirit alive, because the more you share with others and the more you find these similarities and create these grounds for discussion, it creates this community spirit of allowing people to build off of each other and find power and strength and comfort within each other.
So my last question for the roundtable here is, anyone can answer it. It's, do you have any one specific moment that you can think of since you've been talking about your experiences that has felt particularly powerful for one reason or another?
I just started talking about this past week. This is literally like my third or fourth speaking. So I was trained by 3GNY earlier in the year, and I had my first speaking experience with my middle school in West Orange. And then I spoke at another one. And I think the most powerful experience so far has been having not my students reach out to me to say, could you tell me more? Could you answer this question? Can I see your grandfather's interview? I kind of expected my students who are in my classroom to reach out and say those things, but to have other people and other students who are not in my classroom, who I don't know, reach out and ask those things, and to also have parents email saying, thank you for sharing this story, has been probably really impactful. And then being able to come here and speak in my community about my story has also been really kind of awesome. So thank you for giving me the chance to do this. But I just started a week ago. So that's, I mean, it's been pretty good so far, so.
Anyone else want to share a quick story?
The first time I spoke was to 8th graders at Edison Middle School in Westfield. And I had no idea how that was going to go. I mean, nothing against 8th graders, but they're 8th graders. Hey, I had 2 of them at one point. They sat, there was 2 of us that were speaking. They sat there and didn't say a word and listened to everything that we said. And when we were done, the teacher says, any questions? And of course, as 8th graders are apt to do, dead, stone cold silence. And then she said to them, okay, I'd like you all to take a couple of minutes and journal. And after they did that, it was like as if they then became more comfortable. And then suddenly there was a flood of questions, things I didn't expect, things we expected. And we talked till the bell rang. And, you know, that was something, realizing that there is a want of the knowledge, but they're not getting it.
So speaking of time to journalize, everyone does have a piece of paper if they would like to ask any questions for our panel near the end of this. I just wanted to give that quick reminder. Alex, did you want to share a quick story?
Sure. My most recent speaking engagement was in Chatham High School, and spoke for about 32 minutes in a 45-minute period, and next period was lunch. And the kids stayed 25 minutes into their lunch period to ask questions and hear more about the story. And to me, that was incredibly impactful, because it was a couple of years back when I was in high school. And I remember not wanting to sit in class, not wanting to listen to a speaker necessarily, wanting to go and hang out with my friends during lunch. And so to spend 25 minutes of their free period with me was very impactful.
All right, so Thank you all so much for your answers to my questions. I'd like to introduce Miss Julie Klickus, a teacher of World History, Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and AP Human Geography at the Academy for Information Technology here in Scotch Plains.
Thank you very much, Jason. I was actually Jason's world history teacher. It was a couple years ago, and he is currently my student government vice president. I'm incredibly proud of all the hard work that Jason, Aaron put together for this program. I'm completely impressed by all of you and your stories. I'm so honored to speak today at this event. I just want to thank you for having the courage to come up here, for taking the time out of your day to share with those people who are here in the room and others who might be watching. We all agree the Holocaust was a horrific event that should never be forgotten. It's important to remember the victims and survivors of this atrocity and to learn from the lessons of the past. We must work tirelessly to never allow something like this to happen again. The survivor and descendants who are here today are living witnesses to the Holocaust. They have seen firsthand the horrors of the event. They have lost loved ones, and they have suffered unimaginable trauma. But they have also found the strength, as many have shared, to carry on. They've rebuilt their lives, and they're now sharing their stories with us. It's their stories that are a reminder of the importance of tolerance, respect, and understanding. They are the reminder that we must never take our freedom for granted. As students, you have a unique role to play in Holocaust education and studies. Many of you are descendants of those who survived the Holocaust, and you are the one who will carry on the legacy of remembrance. You can use their voices to speak out against hatred and intolerance. I wanted to use these moments here at the podium to issue a call to action to each of you in the room, and I want to focus around two specific areas, two main points. One is educational advocacy, and the other is to accept the challenge to stand up against anti-Semitic rhetoric. New Jersey was one of the first states in the United States to mandate Holocaust education in public schools. The history of this mandate can be traced back to the early 1980s when a group of Holocaust survivors and educators began to advocate for the inclusion of Holocaust education in state schools. In 1982, then Governor Tom Kean created the New Jersey Advisory Council on Holocaust Education, which was tasked with developing a plan for Holocaust education in the state. The Advisory Council's plan was adopted by the state legislature in 1994 and became law as the New Jersey Holocaust Education Mandate. The mandate has helped to ensure that Holocaust education is a part of the curriculum in all New Jersey public schools, and it has helped to raise awareness of the Holocaust among students in the state. But how this mandate is implemented in districts and school districts around the state looks very different. I implore each one of you, especially if you do not have classes for Holocaust education, to advocate for what you really want to see in your classrooms. You need to use your voice. You need to be heard. You do need to advocate tirelessly for Holocaust education. Why? Holocaust education is important for a number of reasons. It helps us to all learn from the past. By learning about the Holocaust, we can all better understand the causes of this atrocity and the factors that led to it. And this understanding can help each of us to prevent similar events from happening in the future. Holocaust education helps us to develop both empathy and compassion. By learning about the suffering of others, we can develop a greater understanding of the human condition. This understanding can help us to become more tolerant and understanding of those who are different from us. Holocaust education helps us all to build a more just and equitable world By learning about the Holocaust, we can become more aware of the dangers of hatred and discrimination, and it's this awareness that will help us work together to create a world where everyone is treated with respect and dignity. Listen, as students, I encourage you to get involved in positively encouraging the growth of Holocaust education in the schools in our surrounding communities. There are so many ways you can make a difference. You can attend events like this one today. You can talk to your friends, community members. You communicate through social media with elected officials. You can volunteer your time. You can get involved in student organizations that promote Holocaust education. It's by getting involved in Holocaust education that you can help to ensure that the Holocaust is never forgotten, and you can work to build a more just and equitable world. In recent years, there has been a resurgence in anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic rhetoric. There are many reasons why it's important to challenge this rhetoric. Anti-Semitism is a form of hate speech. It is harmful to Jewish people, and it's harmful to our society as a whole. It can lead to violence. It can create a climate of fear and intimidation, and it can make it difficult for people to live their lives freely and openly. There are many ways that you as individuals can challenge anti-Semitic speech. One way is tied to my first call to action. It's to educate yourself about anti-Semitism, to learn about it. The more you know, the better equipped you will be to challenge it. You must always speak out against it. When you hear someone making anti-Semitic remarks, speak up. Let them know why their words are unacceptable. Challenge anti-Semitic speech by communicating with officials, elected officials, participating in protest, supporting any kind of organization that would combat this speech. I understand. This is not always an easy task. It can be uncomfortable. It can even be dangerous. But it is, as our speakers have said, it's important to remember that silence makes you complacent to the action. If you do not speak out against it, you're allowing it to spread. Please be prepared. Take your time to learn about different issues, the ways that these things can manifest themselves, maybe stereotypes, conspiracy theories, denying the Holocaust, using anti-Semitic slurs as a joke. We should be speaking to each other respectfully. Even if you confront someone who has anti-Semitic views, it's important for you too to be respectful, because there's a difference between being disrespectful and standing up to hate speech. You can stand up to hate speech without being disrespectful. In fact, I believe it's important for you to have some level of respect, even when you're dealing with somebody who has no respect. It shows that you're not afraid. You're not afraid of this person. You're not going to be intimidated by them. And it shows that you are not going to stoop to their level, and you're not going to use hate speech yourself in response to them. You're going to show them that you are better than them, and you are not going to let them win. You asked about fighting. This is a way to fight, to educate yourself and to stand up at every opportunity. I know it's not always easy to be respectful when you're dealing with someone, but it's important to remember that you are not alone, and there are many people who are willing to stand up with you. Be persistent and always be positive about yourself. I would urge you to join me in challenging any and all anti-Semitic speech and to continue to advocate for educational opportunities with regard to the Holocaust and genocide studies. Together, we can create a world in which everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their religion or ethnicity. I would like to thank everyone for coming here this afternoon, and as was mentioned, it's your presence. This is the testament to your commitment to fighting against intolerance and discrimination. I hope that you all leave here this afternoon with a renewed sense of hope and determination to make the world a better place. Thank you.
Finally, I'd like to introduce one of our board members, Anya Miller, to lead the Q&A. If anyone has any questions that they wrote down, feel free to hold up the papers, and we will have board members coming around to collect them to bring them up.
Thank you so much. So for our first question that we received prior to the event is for Fran. What struggles did you face adjusting to normal life after the Holocaust?
That's a good question, but a tough one. I came to this country when I was 10 years old. When I told the story of the reason my family wanted a doctor with them was because my mother's sister had tuberculosis. She was very sick, and she died while we were in hiding. Can you hear me? This thing? Okay. Then when we got to the DP camps, they found out that I had tuberculosis. Today, people don't know about it, but it's a very contagious lung disease. And that's like one of my worst memories, believe it or not, because when they found out I had tuberculosis, I spent 3 years in and out of sanatoriums because that's how they would treat it. They'd send you to fresh air country in those days. And I think that impacted me, what I had gone through and what it, I'm trying to find the words. I was a spunky kid, I remember, when I was little. And all the spunk was taken out. It was there inside, but I didn't mention it. So I felt very lonely in school. Nobody talked about it. And it took me it's taking me, I do this as the years go on, trying to get more strength to come out of it, but my mother also was very badly impacted. She didn't get remarried, and she worked, and she lived a long life, and she was very, very, very close to her family. But something was lost. And so I don't know what else to, what they're looking for me, it impacted me, yes. And that's why I was so, when I got to the brick factory where my father was murdered, plus the 400 other Jews, I felt I don't feel, I don't know how you can stop anti-Semitism. I think we have to be very careful, the leaders we elect, and we have to, pick our friends.
Okay. Thank you. To our panelists, how do you respond to those who say the Holocaust didn't happen?
I suppose punching them is not an appropriate answer, right? Like we're not advocating for violence right now, right? Okay.
You're supposed to have respect, right?
I've never had that experience, thankfully. I'd probably have to take a really deep breath, like I do a lot with my students, and try to kind of investigate where that thinking comes from. And I'd have to be just very logical about how you respond to that. Because if you come at that kind of question with like, any type of emotion or rage, you've immediately lost any type of dialogue or the ability to have a dialogue with somebody who's going to say something that's stupid to you. But I would probably have to figure out where that idea is coming from, and then from there, I guess, figure out what kind of conversation I'm about to have. But
I'd have to find Pam.
No violence, right?
Because I would,
right, well, it's easy to sit here and say, well, this is what should happen, but what actually would happen might be very different, but I'm on camera right now, and I know a lot of people in this room. So I feel like the appropriate response is to say, okay, let's get into teacher mode and figure out what is the history and behind you saying something like that, to then address and say, let's look at other histories as well, and kind of talk it out as logically as I'm supposed to on camera.
Can I say, I think I've never met anybody who said to me the Holocaust didn't happen. And everybody knows it's more, if somebody said it, it has been so documented, like very few things have been documented like that. So people do it to get a reaction. And I just feel that why we focus on it, I wonder, because to me it seems like, what's the big issue? It's not. We all know it happened. And because some people, countries like Iran might be saying it, and they know it happened. So why even give them the credibility of an answer? I think what I'm saying is I wouldn't want to give this. I think it's played up too much. I think many of the Jewish organizations sometimes lose touch with the reality of that. To me, he said, Zionism is more important than some of this other stuff, because I still come back to it's very important to have a strong country behind you. And some of these other things, and what I read about colleges, that kids are afraid that students are afraid to wear a yarmulke, or that to me is like you're concentrating on the wrong thing when you're talking about Holocaust denial. It's be proud as a Jew, be proud as an Israeli. To me, Judaism and Zionism are the same thing, and in a positive way. So I guess I've just become more militant, and I never was that way before, but now I feel that way. So, and I wish organizations, these fundraising organizations, would spend less time on things that are trivial and spend more time on the real dangers, like what the educational system is teaching, what colleges are teaching, what's going on. I think that type of thing, I think, is more important. I think sometimes they pick issues that would give them good fundraising, but look into what is more important. And you're fighting for. Sorry, I'm really at a loss for words. For the right point I'm trying to make is pay attention to the important thing, not the trivial thing.
Thank you. Our next question is, what do we do about the fact that some of the current anti-Semitism is being generated by some elected officials? For Ms. Kleikis.
We vote. We communicate with the ballot. That would be my suggestion. We organize. You know, I did come up and introduce myself as an educator at the school. I have been there for many years, but I am also the association president at my local, I'm tasked with organizing the members that work alongside me, my colleagues. When change is needed in any setting, when people are disappointed in the people who have been elected to represent us, we get out in force and we vote. That's how you communicate your dissatisfaction with people who are anti-Semitic. I mean, you got to do the best. You got to work and try to do the best you can, and have those hard conversations with people and remind them, if this is what you're going to continue to vote for, this is what you're going to continue to get. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That concludes our Q&A section. To hand it back over to Lad.
I just want to thank everybody again for your attention, for your questions, for your insights, for the panel, for all of your insights and sharing with us. And please keep doing it. The more we have it, the better it is. The more we can talk about it, the more we can share, the better it is. People, believe it or not, don't believe it still happened and don't want to. And it's a cycle of hatred that goes on well beyond just anti-Semitism. There's a lot of hatred out there, and I say it to the kids a lot. Let's be kind. Let's be nice. It goes a long way in this world, and we need a lot more of it. And to the entire panel's point, that will make a big difference. Communicate, trust, be nice, say thank you. So thank you from all of us to you for taking the time to come out to share with us. Thank you for all of you for sitting and being a part of this. And thank you to the teens in the chapter for your leadership, for your support, for your work. Once again, this is all run and done and led by all of them, not just the group you saw standing up, but the rest of the chapter that is here as well has been very, very involved in all of our programming and taking this out to the community. So thank you very much for everything. Thank you all for being part of this, and please never forget. Thank you very much.
Thank you.